What's up, good people of the world? So, recently I had the opportunity to orchestrate a cue for someone else. It's not something I do a lot because usually I do composing. But anyway, it was a very interesting and very fun process of taking just a piano sketch and orchestrating it with, some direction from the composer into a fully orchestrated piece of music. So the composer is a fantastic composer. His name is Ray Fernandez Jr., a good friend of mine. The moment the film is released, I'll put the link in the description. So go ahead and check and see if it's there if you're watching in the future. But anyway, so he gave me this piano sketch. And he gave me a basic harmonic analysis, some accompaniments, and some directions here. What instrumentation he wants me to use. But other than that, he left a lot of the decision making up to me. So, and it was a very fun challenge, especially since it's a very pianistic piece. So in order to take something that's kind of written for piano and make it idiomatic for the orchestra was definitely a fun challenge. But anyway, I'll go ahead and just play the piano sketch that he gave me, and then I'll show you what the final sampled version that was orchestrated and sampled sounds like. And then we'll dive into the full score and see how I approached it. So a very nice piece, very pretty, very haunting. Some nice melodic content, some nice harmony. I really liked it. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and play the final version and kind of scroll along, and then we'll dive into the score. Yeah, so I had a lot of fun working on it. A lot of cool little. I don't know. There's just a lot of opportunity to have a lot of fun with the orchestration. So had a good time working on this. So I really like just to melodically how this little figuration right here. He keeps wanting it to resolve to C, but he does that several times, but then waits until the very end for it to resolve. It's pretty cool. So anyway, so let's go ahead and check out the orchestration. So we're going to kind of go back and forth between the piano sketch and the orchestration, so I can kind of show you my thought process for taking something like this and extrapolating it for the full orchestra. So first off, before we do that, let's look at the instrumentation that I chose. So I went with a pretty large instrumentation because, for a subtle piece like this, it's really important to have a lot of auxiliary woodwinds, and especially if there's a lot of repetition of the thematic material. So when the theme repeated, I wanted to reorchestrate it every time to make it sound fresh, to still have the same sort of like, chilling, haunting kind of, feeling. but at the same time to slightly change the texture. So, and since it was I knew it was going to be for samples, I might as well take it, have as big an orchestra as I could hope for. So I went with piccolo, 2 flutes, an alto flute. I used a lot of alto flute in this. 2 oboes, an English horn or cor anglais, 2 clarinets in B flat, a bass clarinet in B flat, and a contrabass clarinet in B flat. I love the contrabass clarinet. And 3 bassoons, because bassoons are your blenders, and they have a very dark, warm sound, and they're great. They're a great alternative to the horns, because the bassoons in their mid tenor range blend very well with the horns and can provide padding just like the horns can, but the horns are a bit more brassy. So I like to go back and forth between those 2 options in terms of pads in the background. So that's why I went with 3 bassoons instead of just 2 bassoons, to get those triads. And then, of course, contrabassoon, 4 horns, 3 trumpets, 2 trombones, bass trombone, tuba, pretty standard setup there, timpani, bass drum, cymbals, gong, tubular bells, glockenspiel, vibraphone, and I used a lot of vibraphone, piano, harp, celeste, and string section. Okay, so returning back to the piano theme. So the one big thing that you want to think about when you are taking a pianistic figuration, like arpeggios or just left-hand figurations that you want to do, there are 2 ways that you could go about rescoring piano music for the orchestra. Okay, some, like I know Rimsky-Korsakov in one of his books, I think it was The Principles of Orchestration, where he said that it's like the orchestrating from a piano score is like the lowest thing an orchestrator can do, and it must have frustrated him greatly, because he was definitely a very orchestral composer in the sense of composing very contrapuntally and having lots of different lines going on at once. And some piano composers are very, very orchestral, like Brahms has very, it's not unidiomatic, it's playable, but it's not typical things that you'd see for the piano. There are a lot of contrapuntal lines and chords and playing something down here and then playing something up here to give the sense of you having, bigger hands than you actually do. But I think in this case, what you could do is you could either just completely rework it and create new accompaniments. But when I kind of listen to this, well, first off, the accompaniments that are accompanying the melody are very good. I think Ray did a very, very good job complementing the melody, spelling out the harmony, and making nice, like nice lines. That's a nice accompaniment, and I didn't want to, just destroy all that he had created, because it was very, very nicely written. So because if it was fast arpeggios, it might be difficult to translate into the orchestra, and you'd have to use dovetailing, and it might be better to sort of rework it, kind of figure out what the intentions are, and then rewrite the accompaniment so that they're more orchestral. But I think in this case, it worked very well. But what I had to kind of do is split up the different sections, right? So for example, obviously orchestral instruments can't sustain, like harp and celeste and piano can sustain, but so you kind of have to extrapolate it across, like the strings, for example. So I had the bass, the double bass hold a note, right? And then another string instrument like the viola or cello hold a note, so boom, bee. So this is they're holding, and then they're holding, and then we have this line up on top, and then that's just a melodic line that kind of exists independently of itself, right? And there were a lot of lines like this. Like, for example, this line right here. There's a lot of that in the piece, and I almost always interpreted this as its own line. So you have boop bum, and then another instrument like the trombone or the horn or some of the woodwinds going ya-da-dum, boom boom ya-da-dum, and it worked. It seemed to work out, quite nicely. So that was a lot of my approach for taking these pianistic textures and turning them into orchestral. So let's go ahead and check this out, all right? So most of this piece, with the exception of some of the climaxes, is very string section driven, and then I chose different doublings from the woodwinds to slightly change the color. So the strings are the main, they're holding down the main content, and they're the main focus, but then other woodwinds are coming. And sometimes, when I used bassoon to double for this section, for the next section I used English horn, and kind of switched doublings again to give it that variety of color. But anyway, you can kind of see what I was talking about here, right? We have the contrabass, and cello, just playing this low pedal tone. Then we have the viola with this nice resonant G, and then the melody on top. The melodic part of the accompaniment is held over by the second violin. Right. And basically what I just wrote here is usually something that I do when it's, when I'm not the one sampling it. Brett Inslee is the one that sampled this particular piece. I performed the parts in, but he sampled it and did a fantastic job mixing it. But anyway, just for clarity, whenever I send a score off for it to be sampled, I almost always do this, which just lets them know. That way I don't have to write unison Divisi, unison Divisi, unison Divisi all the time. It basically just says whenever the strings are split, it's always Divisi. So yeah. So that begins off with that particular accompaniment, and then we get the melody. And I chose a doubling, which was kind of inspired by some of the things that I've seen Williams do, John Williams, where he takes a combination of like 3 or 4 instruments and combines them together in certain registers to give a very unique, almost new timbre, right? So what I did was I took the alto flute, which is a very hollow sound. Right, very, very nice hollow sound, very quiet, very subtle. And then the vibraphone, which has a cold timbre. And it's bell-like, but it's not metallic. It doesn't have all of it's very pure. Like, it sounds like a bell instrument, like Celeste, or, tubular bells, or glockenspiel, but it doesn't have all of those muddy upper overtones that can, make it a little bit too intense. It has a very pure tone, which I like. And then, of course, the harp, which gives it a pluck. It's a slightly warmer timbre. Right, and then the lower register of the Celeste, which just has wonderful overtones. Right, and that nice bell sound. And plus, performing all of these parts in, even though I try to be as perfect as possible, the slight human error that comes from not everyone lining up perfectly, like quantized, gives it a nice bell sound. So it's not like ting, 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 but it's brung, 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 brung. It gives it a nice, I don't know, sort of a human element that adds to the creepiness. So that just sounds like this. And you see the flute gives it the sustain. Right. And I wanted the sound to get darker for the second half of the melody, so you can see I kind of took advantage of what the melody did, right? Because the melody goes ya da 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 dee da, but if you just move that down an octave, it creates a nice line in and of itself. So I had some of them go down and some of them go up, right? I had the vibraphone go down, the alto flute go up, but then I added in the upper octave of the harp, and then I had the Celeste go up to give a slightly different. So you still have the sense of the melody and the fact that it goes, but because some of the other instruments went into their lower register, the texture sort of shifts. And that's a fun thing that I like to do in more subtle orchestrations. Is even if you have a particular combination of instruments, if it's in 2 octaves, you can switch which one has which octaves, and without even changing the instrumentation, you can change the color around. Right? There are just an infinite number of possibilities, and it's a really fun thing to do. And then another thing that I did was originally he had this. Ya da da. So rather than just having ya da da be a melodic device, I had the B, or it should be spelled as a C flat, but I just spelled it as B for easy reading. E da da. Rather than just having that move down, I had the B or C flat stay the same, and then we have the A flat, and then the B flat, and then the A flat, which creates this nice little clash, minor second clash. Right, a richer sound. Right. Right, so that's how I approach that, and then we get into this next section, okay, where we have the bass and the cello and the viola and the violin kind of doing the similar setup. Right, and you can see I'm pretty careful about where I use these low C extensions, and I think it has a very nice very very rich low sound. So ya da 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 dum boom. It gives it a very low, epic, rich sound. Okay, so and then I took the lower register of the harp and had them play the bass notes along with the cello and the double bass, which the low notes of the harp are very very resonant, especially when playing in flat keys. And then I took octaves in the right hand of the harp and had them double the melody. Right, and then drop them out to give a sense of clarity down there, just for that low pedal tone. And I think also, when you change from one section to another section, to keep something consistent can help, kind of seam up the tapestry, right? So the harp kind of switched up into playing octaves, yada. So it makes sense for the harp to continue yada da da. So even though what instruments have the melody is changing in this new section, at least one instrument is staying the same, and that gives it a sense of continuity. So, and then I basically just took what all the lines that the strings were doing and doubled them across some woodwinds, right? So the English horn, I love the timbre of the English horn. It has a reedy, woodsy, very melodic sound, but it's not nearly as duck-like. It's basically like if you were to have a bassoon play in this register, the bassoon would be very thin and very airy, right? Because it's high up in the bassoon's register. And if it were for the oboe, it would be very, very, I don't want to say harsh, but, kind of duck-like. In the oboe, good oboist can have beautiful tone there, but it's still going to be, pretty harsh. Whereas the English horn still has projective power to be a soloistic instrument, and has a nice, strong tone to it, but it's not so strong that it can be overpowering like the oboe can be in that particular register. So that's for the English horn. Right, very nice. And then I took the the bass clarinet, the contrabass clarinet, and then the bassoon sort of in the middle register, and kind of had them do their thing. Right, and it adds a lot of richness to the sound. If I was just to have the strings, it would be fine, and a lot of people just tend to just use strings and then not double, but just little doublings like this. You don't want to overdo it, but very careful doublings can make it sound so much more rich. Okay, and then moving on to this section over here, I just, let me see. Yeah, I dropped out all of the woodwinds to give a sense of textural change. Right, and then we move into this next section, and in order to make the continuity of this line pop out rather than split it off across the other sections, I just gave I gave a sense of clarity to the texture, so where we have this low pedal tone and then yada dee da, so it's not like we have full chords, but we just have one single line above this. All right. And for the second, low, pedal tone, I had harp and piano. Did I have anybody else? Yeah, I think I had. Yeah, Tubular Bells playing their little, scary Halloween kind of note. Right, that's a nice bit of scariness. Right, and then I also doubled what the cellos were doing in the bass clarinet. But playing one dynamic level underneath what the cellos are doing, because the clarinets are great blenders because they have such a hollow tone, and they can play so quietly. You know, the clarinets have better dynamic control over most of their range than pretty much any other woodwind instrument. So you know that, you know, if you combine the bass clarinet at, you know, pianissimo with the cello at mezzo piano, you can hear how it adds a richness to the tone, but it still sounds like cellos are playing. You know what I mean? It doesn't distract from the timbral characteristic of the cello. Okay, and then we get a similar bell-like sound to before, but with vibraphone and English horn and alto flute, right? And in this case, the alto flute, which was the main thing before, since it's in its lower register, is going to be very subdued, and the English horn is going to be the thing that pops out much more. And it's quite interesting how when you combine a member of the double reeds and a member of the flute family together, what is on top shifts depending upon where you are in the range. Like the higher you get, the more the flute is going to pop out because the double reed is going to get quieter up there. And then when you go lower, then the double reed gets louder and the flute becomes quieter. So it almost has like this shifting color as you go up and down the register. I mean, you can hear that here. Right, and then that in combination with the vibraphone sounds like this. Right. And then when we get into this, you know, this diminished chord moment where it's building up and wants to go to the C, I do a little dovetailing and switch the alto flute to the flute because I don't want it to get super loud. I still want it to be in its sort of chill part of an instrument's register. So you can see I dovetail the alto flute into the normal flute, and then I dovetail the English horn into the oboe, and it's pretty seamless. Right. So that is how that works, and of course, you know, the vibraphone stays the same because the vibraphone can, you know, has complete dynamic control because it's a percussion instrument. And again, even though we're switching from English horn and alto flute to flute and oboe, the vibraphone staying the same gives it a sense of continuity, you know, to reiterate. And then I also, when the melody started, took the accompaniment in the left hand, doubled it in the harp, and you'll notice I, you know, was careful about where the basically all the slurring just denotes pedaling. If you were to write out, you know, you'd have to write out dampened strings for harp, and for Celeste you'd write out pedal markings, and for vibraphone you'd write out pedal markings like you would for a piano. But again, since it's not for live players, I basically just denoted that with slurs and then played it in the sampling, and that's how that turned out. And luckily Note Performer does that as well, so it gives me an accurate sense. So yeah, so this right here, again, you know, using the lower range of the Celeste, so we get the harp in one octave and then the Celeste in the other harp to give it a bit of a bell sound. Right, you know, just a very slight edge onto the sound, not enough to be distracting. That sounds like this. Right, and then brought down that extra octave of the sound. And then when we move up into this in this new section right here, we, you know, build up into this kind of quasi tutti. There are like 4 different ways to pronounce that word. But rather than bringing everybody in at once, I kind of led them in, because you got to be careful with the brass, because in a subtle situation like this, they can just pop out, you know. So what I did was, rather than have, because he basically had these chords that played the lower octave and then played the higher octave. Oh, let me show you on the original piano sketch. Yeah, right here, right. He basically had everyone shift octaves, right? Like just playing it in the piano like you would in order to reiterate the tone. But you can see there's this common tone between the A flat and the A flat. So I tried to keep that intact by utilizing some voice crossing. So you can see I keep that trombone playing the A flat, and then I have one trombone playing underneath it and then moving up the octave. So that way that trombone being held so that all the brass aren't moving at once, right? Because that can be a little bit awkward, especially with the trombones, because the way the trombone slide works, their legato is not quite as smooth as like the horns or the trumpets. So that kind of solves that problem. And of course, they come in on beat 2, not beat 1. Right, and then the horns, just 2 of them come in for the so it's kind of this terrace thing. They come in gradually, bit by bit, and lead in very smoothly. Right, but then they don't actually play in this climax. We kind of save them for later, but they help to give a little push for that section. So that whole section sounds like this. This is a huge score, sorry. The strings down here kind of coming in at the very beginning. So it's strings, then brass, then horns, and then we get into this new section over here, which this is just the way I orchestrated this is ripped straight out of E.T. The big creepy moment at the beginning when they're sort of going through the forest, and there's kind of that chromatic line. This line reminded me of that, so I decided to approach it in that particular way. So we have both of the flutes playing in octaves and then doubling both of the violin section, which gives a very nice tone. Right, and the doubling changes a little bit through. Because once we get into the lower register, it's going to be a little bit too low for the the flutes to be able to project well. So that's why I switched to the alto flute, because it's in the higher register of the alto flute, and then for the lower register for the English horn. Okay, so you can see how the balance is consistent across, because we're shifting ranges. Right. Whereas, just for demonstration purposes, if I were to just keep it with the flutes, it would get much, much quieter in that second section. Right, loses a lot of the power, so that's why I did that. Let's see what else we have going on. Oh yeah, so I took the line, like I was talking about, if we go look over at the section right here, yeah. Right, so kind of when I hear this, I hear like 3 different melodic lines happening inside of this at once, right? We hear this low pedal tone, right? Bum, and then we hear this right, and then on top we have this, and I wanted to go back down to A flat to be consistent, so I changed what he did there and did but anyway, I put that in the cellos, doubling the horns, just 2 of them, so it's not too much, and I think that's it for that. So yeah, actually it turns out I did keep that the same. And then I'm for the low pedal tone, and then this other line I had a bassoon, or 2 bassoons and contrabassoon, doubling the viola and the contrabass. Right, and this is a very common thing, to push the cello up in its upper register above the viola, and it's because the viola's low tones are pretty resonant, And also, you know, I really want that, you know, kind of moving in contrary motion with the melody to pop out, and it's gonna pop out a lot more. You know, if I still wanted to have the horns, but then I had the violas instead of the cellos, then the horns would overpower the violas, and it would seem like the horns are the most important thing rather than the cellos being the most important thing. So, you know, again, these are all really subtle decisions that you can make for tone color purposes, right? And then I had basically a soft mallet, a bass drum, and timpani in 2 octaves. This is something I probably wouldn't do in a live setting, but that low C in a timpani is really nice. So, you know, that sounds like this. Right, and of course that sounds, you know, much richer with the actual, you know, sampled version. And then a nice little gong, very, very, very subtle gong. So, and obviously the sampled gong sounds a lot better. And then I brought the trombones in just for this last chord to give a nice sense of, you know. Right. And the cellos are oops. The cellos are doubling that upper line, and then the violas divisi are doing the lower thing. And this is something that was not on the original score, but I just heard it, and he liked it. So, you know, I don't know, just the sound of that ninth to me is a kind of a Bernard Herrmann-esque thing. So, and of course these violas are much quieter in the sample version because we were using symphonic series, I think. Yeah, symphonic series, and they're good with string divisi. If you play 2 notes, it'll go from 14 players to 7 on each note, so you get the proper balance. So, and you can see I dropped out the low bass so that, you know, we really have the sense of mid-range trombone taking the focus, and then the low bass comes in. To the new section. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. I did bring in another horn for that low, for the low note there. We did use a low piano, and you know, timpani, but that's all pretty self-explanatory stuff. Oh yeah, and I had a bassoon double the cello because that's a really nice range for the bassoon because it's not too low and it's not too high, so it has a very nice melodic but projecting quality. And again, it kind of starts out with the bassoon, you know, kind of has the more reedy tone, but then when it gets higher, the bassoon gets lighter, and the cello kind of takes the spotlight with that D. So again, I love that kind of thing. Bassoon, and then cello pops out. Can you see how they just like switch? It's really, really fascinating how that works. But anyway, and then we get back into this section, which is basically just a reiteration of the melody. But I change it slightly. The first time I use a normal flute now instead of an alto flute because we're in a new key now. We're in F minor instead of C minor. I use 2 octaves of vibraphone, harp, and then 1 octave of celeste in combination with the strings just like before. So a similar sound to before, but because of the key change and because I used a bit more instruments this time, it has a clearer quality to it. It's not quite as dark, right? Okay, and then a similar thing with this. That second iteration, I changed it a little bit to give it a sense of like we're moving somewhere. And I think I rearranged this a little bit too, if I remember correctly. Yeah, because this time this is on the contrabass clarinet. So it's kind of like in the clarion range of the contrabass clarinet, whereas I think before it was on the bass clarinet. So because it's higher up on the range of the contrabass clarinet, relatively speaking, it's going to pop out a little bit more. So again, lots of little decisions about what to double and what to do there. And then, you know, we have the English horn doing its thing. But then alto, flute, and oboe, you know, oboe in its lower register, which has a very reedy sound. Right, in combination with the hollowness of the alto flute, sounds like this. All right, and then we get into this new actiony section right here. Okay, so this is something that I knew that it was going to sound a lot better when I sampled it, you know, with the low brass and the growl and those types of things. Yeah, okay, so I have contrabass clarinet. First, just the cellos are playing the ostinato, then the contrabass clarinet in, and then the first clarinet and then second clarinet. I really wanted to show off the timbre of the clarinet in this particular instance because I like the way that it sounded. Right, and we have this big octave string thing, and this was tough to try and build this because I wanted to make this scary. I didn't want it to be cheesy. So, yeah, so the low piano in combination with the brass, and then I also have the tubular bells play along for us a little bit. And then you wait. Right, and you know, having the tubular bells play those notes, you know, it's very muddy, very overtony, and it's very kind of creepy sound, right? It kind of reminds me of Signs. If you guys remember James Newton Howard's Signs, main title sequence, right? He kind of has the similar sort of build up and this huge thing, and then right at the end, the harpsichord comes in. So that's kind of a similar thing to this. And I really made this pop out in the final version. And then of course the piano playing these giant spread out octaves has a really creepy sound to me. So. Right. With all the strings. Right, and then I brought in some of the upper woodwinds for the last little push, right? So, you know, we have piccolo, we have flute, we have alto flute, we have English horn, and then I saved the oboes, and I saved the upper register of the piccolo, right? You'll notice I kind of put them down there and then save that, which really pops out for the very last little bit to, you know, to give that extra push. Right. Right. And let's see. Yeah, that's pretty much it for that section. Oh, and this is really fun. I just love this section. This is really, really beautiful stuff by Ray. So immediately when I heard this, I just thought it had to be Lore bowing, right? Which is they basically play multiple notes under the same bow stroke, but they give a slight pressure and pulsation to each one. This is something that Williams uses a lot for his love themes, and like Yoda's theme, for example, at the very beginning. And I'll put a little picture of that example in Yoda's theme. But anyway, it's a beautiful technique, and I also use muted strings. It'd be a little bit unrealistic to do this in real life, although you could still probably just in real life, you know, kind of record up to this and then just that'll be that take. And then record this next section on a separate take after they put their mutes on. So it still probably wouldn't be a big deal, but obviously in a live setting, they have to have time to put their mutes on. But, you know, so anyway, the strings with mutes is such a, it's like a hug. It's just such a cloudy sound. It's really dreamy. I love mutes. Listen to that. Isn't that just wonderful? Right, and so then I give a little bit of a pit space just to give a warmth, but not, you know, I want it to feel very light. Right, and then of course the melody on top is in the celeste, the harp, and the vibraphone, kind of a similar bell-like quality. Right. And I decided not to have a woodwind double because I didn't want that sustain. I just wanted it to be like bells that sort of fade. So that's why this time I didn't use a woodwind. And then I added this space seemed to be a little empty to me, so I added this little woodwind, or not woodwind, I added this little run in the Celeste and the upper range of the piano. Right. And far back in room means that, when Brett mixed it, he put it really far back to give it a very reverbery, almost special effecty kind of sound. And then the same thing, second time, but I'm moving upward. Right. So all of that sounds like this. Oh yeah, and there I did add a little tubular bell, playing along with this hit, right here, just to give a very subtle, extra bell-like quality to the sound. Right. You can adds a nice little. And what octave you place things in, I'm just checking to see if I did anything with the woodwinds. No, I didn't. What octave you place the tubular bells in is very, very important because, again, it just had the overtone series is so intense that you have to be aware of what's best for the context. Right, so and this makes it really nice because since the basses are not muted and since they're playing pits and they're very resonant, they're loud and in this context they're loud compared to the subtlety of the bell instruments. So it gives it a very warm, rich sound, but because it's so far out of the frequency range and so low compared to the highness of the bell instruments, it's not distracting at all. So I like that. And then of course the fact that we have the violas and the cellos divisi, which lowers their numbers. In combination with concertino playing piano means that they're going to be very quiet and very subtle and not distracting from the bell-like quality. I kind of wish this section goes on longer, but it doesn't. It kind of moves into a creepy section. So, in this section right here was really tough. I was trying to figure out how to, because if he wrote in the original, let me zoom out here. He wrote in the original score that he wanted this to be a climactic section, right? Or brass climactic, right? And it just goes right out from this section into this brass with the climax, but that was difficult to me because it's like we're in this really soft section and suddenly you want a brass climax. So I tried to make it as gradual as possible. So we have the strings coming in from niente, which doesn't sound like niente with no performer, but it does with the samples. So that sort of comes in, and we have the I'm just double checking what I did. We have the horns coming in from a piano with the playing these chords. This nice harmony that he's created. So, and that's usually a good idea, if you have some weird harmony or something. It'll blend better if you put the strings in octaves and then have the full harmony on the brass, especially the horns. They're great for that. Right, and then this right here is just this where the big climax happens. And I ended up taking out the second cymbal hit in the final version because I thought it sounded a little bit cheesy. But yeah, you can see I used some instruments to come in for the first one. Bum, boom, dum, bum, right, with the accent marks. And then I save the trumpets for this very last push where they get that extra rasp in their low register. Trumpets, like I've said before, trumpets in their lower register still have a lot of power down there. They're very raspy sound, even more raspy than the bones. So that's a great thing. And again, saving the tuba, using the, kind of using different instruments, using bass drum, right, and then low register of the timpani, and then cymbals, and then gong, and then tubular bells, so to give a sense of, different things happening. Right, and this was another transition that I had a hard time with. I ended up asking him if I could extend this bar and add a suspended cymbal to kind of make it go a little bit smoother, and that's what I ended up doing, and he said he was fine with that, so... So yeah, so we're now reiterating the theme again for the third time, I think, but this time it has, you know, a real richness to it. The theme is in the strings for the first time. Right, so this time we have, you know, all the bell instruments, or except vibraphone. We have celeste, harp, and upper strings in octaves, and then up here we have, you know, the flute playing at its high register, the alto flute playing at its high register, English horn. So everybody's in a really rich register to give it a real tooty sound. Also spread out across octaves. Right, and you can see I popped the English horn and the alto flute up, but I brought this flute down to give it a slight sense of like the edge has been taken off the sound. So yeah, and then for this next section, I really wanted to have it to like pull it home. You know what I mean? Like and then it's like ya da da da. I don't know. That feels to me like a commentary on the theme. So to go from the spread out like triple octave thing down to everybody's in the same octave with a very like, you know, just chocolatey sound. So to do that, I had the English horns, you know, in combination with the harp. So I dropped out the bell instrument, the celeste, and then I had violins 1, violins 2, and violas playing in their lower register, which sounds like this. Right, and of course the viola can't play that low B or C flat; it's out of their range. So I just devisied the cello so they could pick it up. Right. So, and that's just a common device that happens. And he wanted there to be brass in this section, right? So that's I had the horns split up into 2-part playing their thing. Things like these 8th notes, you know, sound a lot smoother in the actual sampled version, right? And then you know, brought in the this trio again, kind of doing what they were doing earlier. Right, and the horns playing that, and then finally we have the last chord. For that last little push, I brought in the piccolos and the flutes, playing in a nice register, but it's not too high, so it's not like super piercing. And then we brought the first violins up to their upper octave, so now we are back into a triple octaves again. Okay, and then we drop everybody into this unison kind of cold, pure octave sound. And then the horn, that gives the horn room to do their thing. So we have the this is the first time the horns have that in that high register, which gives it a sense of completion. So we have, you know, one bone, which is enough to compete with, you know, 2 horns. So that's why we have one bone playing, you know, the tenor line, and then 2 horns playing the alto line, and then the soprano line with the horn. So that sounds like this. Getting quieter the second time. For this last little section, everybody drops out, and we just have the seconds, the violas and the cellos playing very quietly in this cloistered little, you know, and I think, what did I do here? Yeah. I tried different things. I tried having the cello on the E flat and then having the viola on the D, but I think I like, to give this line a sense of, which I think is what Ray wanted as opposed to, right? Because he wanted that ninth sound, and then of course the Celeste is basically just reiterating that with a nice little blue. Right. So, and then they just fade to niente. Anyway, so that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of this. As always, let me know if you have any questions about anything. I'll go ahead and play the final version, you know, while looking at the while looking at the piano score. Just one more time to give you guys a sense of the whole thing. Let's see. Boo, 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 boo. Oh, and by the way, at the climax of this scary section, I just used a Symphobia riser, you know, just to give it extra scariness. Way in the background. Yeah, so that's the piece. Yeah, again, Ray Fernandez Jr. You know, check out his music. I'll put his SoundCloud link in the description. Great composer. Had a lot of fun working on this. Anyway, I hope you all got something out of this. I will see you in the next video.